There's a switch. It's labeled danger, tokens name severe shock. On the other side of a wall, a man is screaming. A stranger in a lab coat says calmly, "Please continue." You'd stop, right? You're not the kind of person who hurts strangers just because someone in a lab coat told you to. That's exactly what everyone thought. They were wrong. After World War II, the world sat in courtrooms in Nuremberg, staring at men responsible for unthinkable atrocities, and over, their defense was the same two words. Befehl ist Befehl. An order is an order. The world recoiled. Surely that's an excuse. Surely ordinary people don't just obey their way into monstrous acts. A young psychologist at Yale named Stanley Milgram wasn't so sure. He wanted to know, were the Nazis uniquely evil? Or could this happen to anyone? To you? So in 1961, he placed an ad. Ordinary people, from teachers to laborers, could earn $4.50, about $40 today, for 1 hour helping with a study on memory. Simple, harmless, a quick errand for some cash. Except the ad was a lie. And what happened inside that lab would become one of the most disturbing discoveries in the history of psychology. Here's the setup. 3 people. 1 experimenter, an actor, playing a calm, authoritative scientist. 1 learner, also an actor, a likable 47-year-old accountant named Mr. Wallace. And 1 real participant. He's told there's a random draw to decide who teaches and who learns. He always draws teacher. It's rigged, every single time. The teacher watches as the learner is strapped into a chair, electrodes fastened to his wrist. It looks real. It feels real. That's the point. Then the teacher is led into a separate room and seated in front of a machine. 30 switches, 15 volts apart, starting at slight shock, ending at 450, labeled simply 30. Look at those labels for a second. Whoever built this machine wanted you to know, at every single step, exactly what you were doing to another human being. The task is simple. Read word pairs. If the learner gets one wrong, flip the next switch. Every mistake, the voltage climbs. That's it. That's the whole experiment. But here's the twist. The learner never actually gets shocked, not once. Every grunt, every protest is a pre-recorded tape. The real experiment is watching the teacher. At 75 volts, a grunt. At 120, complaints of pain. At 150 volts, he shouts, clearly and unmistakably, "Let me out of here. I refuse to go on." At 300 volts, he pounds on the wall. After 330, nothing. Silence. No screaming, no pounding, just quiet. The teacher has no idea if he's unconscious, or worse, every rational instinct says stop. So participants turned to the man in the lab coat and asked exactly that. And here's where it gets chilling. The experimenter had exactly 4 responses, always delivered in the same calm, flat tone. Please continue. Then, the experiment requires that you continue. Then, it's absolutely essential. Finally, you have no other choice. You must go on. No threats, no punishment for stopping. Just 4 sentences, repeated calmly. And that was enough to keep most people's hands moving toward the next switch. Before running this, Milgram asked experts to predict the outcome. Psychology students, psychiatrists, colleagues who studied human behavior for a living. Their guess? Maybe 1 in 1,000 would go all the way to 450 volts. They were catastrophically wrong. 65%. 26 out of 40 ordinary people delivered the maximum lethal labeled shock. Not psychopaths, not soldiers, everyday citizens who answered a newspaper ad. Now, it's tempting to think these people were monsters. The recordings say otherwise. Participants sweated, stuttered, laughed nervously from pure stress. Some begged the experimenter to check on the learner. This wasn't blind obedience. It was conflicted obedience. Their conscience was screaming stop. Their situation was screaming continue. And in that tug of war, the situation kept winning. Milgram had a name for what was happening in their minds. He called it the agentic state. The moment you stop seeing yourself as the author of your actions and start seeing yourself as someone else's instrument, in his own words, the person comes to view himself as the instrument for carrying out another person's wishes. He no longer sees himself as responsible for his actions. The hand flips the switch, but the mind has already let go of the wheel. Milgram didn't stop at one version. He ran dozens of variations, quietly testing what made obedience rise and what made it collapse. Put the learner in the same room, visible and audible. Obedience drops to 40%. Suddenly, the suffering isn't abstract anymore. It has a face. Make the teacher physically press the learner's hand onto the shock plate. It drops to 30. Have the experimenter give orders over the phone, out of the room entirely. It plummets to 21%. Some people even lied about following orders. But here's the most powerful variation of all. Add 2 other teachers, actors, who simply refuse to continue. Just refuse. Obedience craters to 10%. One voice of dissent was almost as powerful as the authority itself. Milgram later ran an all-female version. Same script, different participants. The result? Identical. 65% went to the max. The only difference was women reported far greater emotional distress while doing it. So maybe this was a product of its time. The 60s. Deference to authority. A more obedient culture. Surely people today would be different. In 2009, psychologist Jerry Berger ran a modified replication, stopped early at 150 volts for ethical reasons, the exact point where the learner first demands to be released. 70% of participants were still willing to go past that point. Berger's own conclusion, almost word for word. People wonder if results would be different today. The answer is no. A year later, a French documentary called The Game of Death restaged the entire experiment as a fake TV game show with a live studio audience cheering contestants on. 80% obedience, not despite the cameras and the crowd, because of them. The performance of authority, the lab coat, the set, the format was enough, all over again. Now here's the part of this story people don't like to talk about. Milgram's participants weren't told the truth until after, and some left the lab shaking, sick, convinced they may have seriously hurt, even killed a stranger. Psychologist Diana Baumrind became one of Milgram's fiercest critics. She argued the lab itself created an artificial trust, a dependency on the experimenter that doesn't even exist in the real world, and that the harm caused simply wasn't worth it. The backlash was so significant, it helped reshape the entire field. Informed consent, the right to withdraw, mandatory debriefing. Modern research ethics exist, in part because of what happened in that Yale basement. So we're left holding 2 uncomfortable truths at once. This experiment caused real harm, and it revealed something about human nature we might never have discovered any other way. Because here's the real gut punch of this whole story. It was never really about electricity, or Yale, or the 1960s. It's about the space between what we believe about ourselves and what we'd actually do. Most of those teachers believed, walking in, that they were kind people, decent people, people who'd never hurt a stranger. They were right about their character. They were wrong about how much the situation could bend it. Milgram put it best himself. It is not so much the kind of person a man is, but the kind of situation in which he finds himself that determines how he will act. Swap the lab coat for a manager's badge. Swap the switches for an email marked urgent. The machinery of obedience didn't disappear in 1961. It just changed its costume. So let's land the plane. An ordinary ad. An ordinary machine. An ordinary person told, calmly, 4 times, to keep going. 65% did. Add one dissenting voice, and it dropped to 10. The unsettling truth isn't that some people are capable of this. It's that most of us are. The only real question left is whether knowing that changes what you do the next time someone in a lab coat says, "Please continue."